Jon Stewart last week, and we covered it on this show, I think, where he talked about the Joe Rogan situation and Spotify and censorship. And, you know, his broader point was like, look, engage. Joe's an honest actor, even if you disagree with him. Even if you disagree with him a lot, he like means where he's coming from, and so he's movable and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Apparently, Jon got a decent amount of backlash from that. And he, in response to the backlash, decided, you know what, let me have on an expert to talk about, like a misinformation expert or something. So so he did a podcast with this person. Look, he's an open-minded guy. He's an intelligent guy. I don't begrudge him having that conversation. No. It's fine to have that conversation.
I'm very skeptical of these misinformation experts to start with, but
totally agree. I'm with you on that completely.
Yes.
Now, I highly recommend everybody go watch the whole thing. It's on his YouTube channel. It's about 30 minutes long. But I wanted to show you guys the part which I think is the crux of the issue here. Notice how Jon Stewart lays out his case in a lot of detail, no uncertain terms here with what his position is. And then notice how the response from this expert just doesn't even address anything he just said. Take a look.
Well, first of all, I know Joe. So I think you always grant more understanding and nuance to people you know, because you know them as more three-dimensionally than what that appearance is. So, and we always demonize those that we maybe feel alien to us.
It's on his YouTube channel?
That goes right in there. I'm already guilty of a bias, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the second part of it, where I run into trouble, is the thing you just said. You talked about they want the benefit, but they don't want the accountability. And you mentioned weapons of mass destruction. And it reminded me, like, the New York Times, right, was a giant purveyor of misinformation and disinformation. I don't know that the Times was purposeful, but misinformation. And that's as vaunted a media organization as you can find, but there was no accountability for them. And I think where I get nervous is in the run-up to the Iraq War and in the prosecution of the Iraq War, I was very vocal and sometimes cursed about that. But the mainstream view, the New York Times, was they have weapons of mass destruction. They have these tubes that can only be used for nuclear war. Saddam Hussein is this, he's that. Couldn't I have gone down and fallen down this if Viacom or Comedy Central had wanted to censor me or had wanted to take me off the platform? Look, I'm not owed a platform. Nobody is. So it's not a First Amendment issue. It's not any of that. We're really, once you're in bed with a corporation, the deal is they have to sell enough beer and you get to do what you want. Right. But my point is, these are shifting sands. And I think I get concerned with, well, who gets to decide what that, I mean, in the Iraq War, I was on the side of what you would think on the mainstream is misinformation. I was promoting what they would call misinformation. But it turned out to be right years later, and the establishment media was wrong. And not only were they wrong, in some respects, you could make the case that they enabled a war that killed hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people and never paid a price for it and never had accountability. And just having an ombudsman print a retraction, to me, is an accountability. So it's very easy to attack Rogan. And I'm not saying that that's not your right and that there aren't things there to talk about. But what I'm saying is, let's be careful because the sands can shift.
Yeah. People are in a new information ecosystem and they're trying their best. But that's the thing about these platforms over the years is that we've asked no accountability from them. They're not built by librarians who are actual stewards of information. And so it's taken us a long time at least the last decade, to get into the moment where we ask more from these companies.
So I want to be fair again. Go watch the whole thing, everybody, so you get a sense of the contours of all of her arguments. But I think showing that clip is actually fair in terms of sort of summing up like the points here. And you made a good point to me before the show about this. Repeat that for everybody because I thought that was really insightful.
I don't know what point you're talking about, but the point I was going to make
here it has to do with she's looking at it from a democratic perspective.
Yes.
So go ahead.
The way she frames this is like, oh, well, now people have this democratic means to hold these companies to account and demand more from them. But that's not the way that this is going to work out. What you're actually asking for is not, we want a democratic say in what these companies are doing, which I totally agree with. That's why I think they should be basically nationalized and regulated as public utilities. What you're demanding is for these corporate behemoths to have even more power. And these are giant monopolies at this point, too. So it's the exact opposite of how she's framing it of like, oh, well, now people have a say. No. What you are demanding is for them to take more power and have more ability and justification to push Jon Stewart off the air when he's advocating against the Iraq war. And I think relevant to this discussion, too, is the fact that just right now, NBC News hired Stephen Hayes. CNN hired Jonah Goldberg.
Both of them pushed us into the Iraq war.
Yes. Stephen Hayes wrote
a book. Yeah.
His claim to fame was writing a book called The Connection about the fake Saddam Hussein hijackers, 9/11, Al-Qaeda connection, which of course was total lies. He also wrote a hagiography of Dick Cheney, for the record. And this guy wasn't misinformation. There were no boycotts about him.
Nobody made a peep except Breaking Points and David Sirota and me.
Right.
Nobody said anything.
Glenn probably said some things about it too. Yeah, but I mean, in terms of mainstream coverage, no, Chuck Todd was out there. I think he sent me the tweet of him celebrating him as like a principled journalist who's fair and reasonable. It's like, yeah, these people were so much more damaging than Joe Rogan could ever hope to be. And they're not only not censored, not subject to accountability, they're elevated to even higher heights of power.
So I'm actually going to go one step further than you on the democratic point, the democracy point of like, her argument is like, well, now democratically, we're trying to hold these companies accountable and whatnot. Because I think Stewart's point really overrides that and is a debate ender because Stewart's point is, look, during the lead up to the Iraq war, the fever pitch in this country for war was overwhelming. Bush had a 90% approval rating at one point, and they were pushing this propaganda at the top of their lungs. And there were very few people who would speak out against it. And everybody who did speak out against it was sort of punished. Like Phil Donahue, for example, kind of lost his show as a result of this. Chris Hedges, same thing. So Jon Stewart's point is like, even if you, like, democratically controlling speech, that's not a good idea. There's a reason why speech is in the right category, constitutionally protected right category, because you need to be allowed to speak, even if you're saying things that are massively unpopular. And his point was, what I was saying was incredibly unpopular at the time, and the democratic will of the people would have said, if these companies existed at the time and you gave them the control to do whatever with speech, they would have all gone after the anti-war voices. That's not even controversial. I think that's like a straightforward historical fact. You don't need to, do any leaps of logic or connect any weird dots to come to that conclusion.
Look at the Dixie Chicks. Yeah.
Exactly. So I can't find a way around that point. So anybody who's on the other side of this debate, I'm sorry, you're just wrong. Like, I don't see a way around that point that who the hell is going to do the so-called fact-checking? Seriously, there is nobody who is perfectly objective. And I know we've gone through the list 1,000 times over, but guys, you really gotta think about this stuff. So many people who are in the official circles, whether it's, the World Health Organization or the CDC or the FDA, were wrong about a lot of stuff involving COVID early on. Like, okay, so when they say things that are wrong, how many times do I have to say something wrong before you say, you know what, CDC, you're not allowed to talk on our platforms, right? Like, you're just going to pull the CDC from it because they've been objectively wrong about even 4, 5, 6, 7 things and wrong in a big way? That doesn't make any sense. Think about when, remember when the leaks came out from WikiLeaks on the DNC stuff, where showing the way the sausage was made and how Bernie was screwed and they were doing everything to undermine him in 2016. You remember that?
Yeah.
It was the people who talked about those factual leaks who were called, you're spreading misinformation. And the argument was, well, maybe Julian Assange got this from Russia, so now you're doing Russian propaganda. In the Russia and Ukraine debate right now, my perspective on it would be totally banned. They would just be like, you're not allowed to say the thing you're saying because you're doing apologetics for Russia and he's an authoritarian leader, Putin is, and so you're not allowed to say this stuff. This is misinformation. This is disinformation. You got to go.
Jen Psaki used that line against a reporter on Air Force One who was asking for, for more backup. This is what Ned Price did, right? He was getting pressed about their allegation, which may be true, I don't know, but they should show some evidence of it, but that they had Russia has this whole plan of a false flag thing and a video and crisis actors and whatever. And Ned Price insinuated that the fantastic journalist who was pressing him on this, that like, oh, well, how dare you believe the Russians over the U.S. government? And it's an attempt to just smear people as like unpatriotic. And so you can see very easily how this would be routinely used against anti-war protesters in particular.
So what I want to do is to get people to imagine exactly the point you just made, but now take it to its logical conclusion. Anytime, like the whole Ned Price video, what if they said, we're banning that, we're not allowing that on any of the social media platforms because you're spreading Russian disinformation?
Right.
What if it was taken off of YouTube, taken off of Mediaite, taken off of Twitter, taken off of Instagram, whatever? Right. We're just going to take it off all those things because I think you're spreading Russian disinformation, and our fact checkers have determined that that is what you're doing, and so now you're just not allowed to talk about it. Guys, this is the world that people are like begging for when it comes to sometimes people saying dumb things, stupid things, malicious things. Look, I have zero love for Malone and McCullough and the stuff that they spread. In fact, I think a lot of the stuff they spread is misinformation, and it is damaging.
Yeah.
But if you want to take this approach, you're shooting yourself in the dick.
Yeah, and the part of it that is really also nefarious is that through this sort of sleight of hand, they've channeled activist energy, people who want to do something, they want to be engaged, they want to be part of this democracy. And rather than that going into any kind of like collective struggle, instead it's going into these cancellation quests.
Literally,
which are all ultimately about not even that content or that person, but are about begging the people who already have have power to claim more power.
Yeah.
That's what the activist impulses of a lot of, liberals and progressives in the country have been like channeled into begging the powerful to claim more power. It's a sad state of affairs.
It really is a sad state of affairs. And I know so many people would say, I'm sure, I can't read the criticism with my thin ass skin, but I'm sure so many people would say like, oh, you're just because it's Rogan, you're saying that. I defended Ann Coulter having the right to speak at a college campus, and I think she's a demon.
I defended just last week Whoopi Goldberg and Dan Bongino. So
Dan Bongino, geez, that's a rough one.
That's a rough one.
Yeah.
But
right.
You got to be consistent here. So yeah, I mean, listen, there's no doubt about it. And Jon acknowledges this in his thing too. He's like, I know Joe. And so yeah, that means that I see him as a three-dimensional human being and not this flat, ridiculous caricature that he's been made into. And there's no doubt that like, of course, we know Joe. We like Joe. We think he has good intentions. He's been supportive of both of our projects that we're doing. But I also think if you look at our body of work, you will see a consistency in the standards we've applied, regardless of whether those were people we personally knew or liked or not.
Even if Joe was the caricature, I'd be saying the same things because it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I do not want there to be a ministry of truth or, fact checkers who get to ultimately decide who gets to speak and who doesn't. Because again, who's going to fact check the fact checkers? And then who's going to fact check the fact checkers who fact check the fact checkers?
Was it Zed that brought up the 9/11 conspiracies, like the 9/11 truthers? Because that's the other piece of this is like, we sort of act like this is all brand new and, we're just figuring out how to deal with this, et cetera. But it's not new. I mean, yeah, the formats change and evolve over time. But in times when we felt a little more confident and secure as a democracy, we would allow, people to have their little 9/11 conspiracy
That's a great
theories.
Point, Krystal. That's such a good point.
It's not I think it was Zed that's, I'm not sure. But anyway, they could have their little 9/11 conspiracy theories, and we didn't act like it was the end of the fucking republic.
Well, you know, I get it. Like, most of the time, you are going to have a situation where it's like the battle of ideas and the better ideas win out, and they're self-marginalizing when they go down certain rabbit holes. Mm-hmm. That happens. But every now and then, you do have a situation that pops up where it's like, maybe the worst idea appears to be winning, or like it's close and then everybody's uncomfortable with that. But like my response to that is work harder, do a better job. Because, if every single time somebody talked about Rogan in the way that mainstream media talks about Rogan, if instead of doing that every time, You just had a list of the direct quotes of the shit that Malone and McCullough
they're
said.
way
You
too
fact-checked it.
They're just way too lazy to do it. I mean, that's the thing is like...
Yeah, they are. You're right.
Yeah.
You guys did it. You guys had on a doctor who was like, look, here's where they're wrong. Here's the few areas where they're right, but overall they're wrong. Here's why they're wrong.
Let me go through claim by claim. There were people who did this on YouTube.
Another
also,
YouTube, that's right.
Who went through claim by claim. I also think about, the reaction to the election conspiracy theories, the whole Stop the Steal nonsense. And, we went through.
You did.
Probably
That's
boring
right.
as fuck for the audience, but we went through every single lawsuit that had been filed and was like, here's what they claimed. Here's what the finding was. How many votes that would even impact, even if it happened, and tracked that over the course of time. So it wasn't, you had people who had genuine mistrust and, were susceptible to believing what was, totally a bunch of nonsense. And rather than just hand waving it's all nonsense, we felt like, okay, what if we just go through these line by line and engage with it and try to help dispel some of the myths? That's why nobody any longer believes in Stop the Steal, Kyle. We did it.
Wait, no, but hold on. You're selling yourself short here because you have an audience that's much more ideologically diverse than my audience. My audience is pretty clearly left-leaning. Your audience is, I don't know what the percentages are, but maybe 40% right-wing or something like that.
About right.
Or, they're more enlightened centrists in your audience and my audience, yada, yada, all that stuff. But because you and Sagar took the time to do that, to like meticulously debunk the ridiculous claims that were coming out of people like Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell or Sidney Powell, Lynn something, whatever.
Linwood,
they're all
Sidney
idiots,
Powell, yeah.
right? But you took the time to do that, and now your audience, even the people who are right-leaning in your audience, none of them are buying Stop the Steal. So it worked in your little corner of the internet.
Yeah, and that's all I can. That's all
you
we can do. But
and
I mean,
by the
that's
way,
so much more effective than just.
And you don't get credit for it either. The media doesn't stop and look at that and go, well, that seemed to work. Maybe we should try that with some of the people or things that we don't like.
Right.
They don't do that. Because like you said, that actually required focus and attention and concern for detail, care for detail. It took time.
Took preparation.
I remember you talking to me about it at the time, like we went through this whole thing.
It took it was like a 30-minute segment that we went through all of them, but But I also feel really good that we did that even, it was the limited impact that we can have. Anyway, the whole point is it's so much better to, if you have something that is in the ecosystem that is wrong, that is dangerous, that is inaccurate, it's so much better to show people the respect of actually engaging with it and explaining, here's the reality, here's what's wrong. Because otherwise you also just feed into this narrative that has worked very well for Trump and has worked very well for Malone and McCullough of like, they just don't want you to hear this information. So they just have to censor it because we're telling the truth and we're speaking power to the man and whatever. And so when you just have that reaction of like, shut it down, that fuels them. That feeds their narrative. That only bolsters and aids them.
Sort of a Streisand effect type thing. You're right.
Totally.
Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.